Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark. I am the lead gardener at Vanier Gardens here, and today I'm going to take you on a virtual garden tour. So let me just share my screen and off we go. Okay, so here we go. Alrighty, so today's program of events, we are going to start off with some acknowledgements, team introductions, our vision and mission as a garden, the map of our campus, then we're going to get into our garden itself, as well as talk about future projects and resources, and then finally finish with about 10 minutes left over for questions. So let me start with some acknowledgements. Here is the island of Montreal, and I just want to acknowledge that the land and the waters are unceded territories of the Ganyagahagan people and other nations of Turtle Island. And it's not only the lands and the waters, but the knowledge itself too. Like a lot of these growing techniques that we practice at Vanier come from permaculture, and a lot of those techniques that feed into permaculture come from a lot of indigenous growing practices too. So we have the land, we have the knowledge itself, and we also have the plants. You know, I always like to start with a little bit of gratitude whenever I do anything gardening related. Without the plants, we wouldn't have, you know, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, and a lot of other beautiful things. So a little bit of gratitude towards them at the beginning always kind of sets us in the right mindset. So, team introductions. I'll start with myself right here in the middle. I have been the gardener at Vanier now for, this is my third season, so my third year working there. I originally started at Vanier 6 years ago. I gave a half-an-hour workshop on balcony gardening, and I have slowly eased my way into this system here. And now in September, I will be starting my permanent position, which is great news. Supporting behind me, quite literally, are Isabel and Rosemary, who are two Seja teachers who have a role as a co-coordinator of the gardens. So they really help me integrate the academic and the managerial aspects of the garden into this Seja system. And then the two young lads in front of me here, Lawrence and Olivier, were our garden employees last year. Lawrence is now at university, and Olivier will be continuing with us, and we are going to be having 3 employees this year, mostly students, well, all of them students, I would think, probably from Vanier, maybe somewhere else. And they really do the hands-on stuff. They're there to help harvest, weed, fertilize, water, all the a lot of the hard work that they do at the gardens is done by them. So that's our team. There's also Dave, who's not in this picture, but who is here today, and David has been more of our academic vision guy. He helps us figure out how to integrate the gardens into pedagogical activities in a more structured way. And it's because of him that I'm here today. So thanks to Dave. Alrighty, now our vision and our mission as a garden. So our garden vision, we are custodians of Vanier's environment, aiming to foster educational interactions between our community and the natural world. So this is why we do what we do. The idea of custodians here, we're not owners, we're not makers. We are here for a very short period of time to look after this land, and our main objective is to create educational interactions. As much as possible, not just for the students and the faculty at a college, but everyone else who happens to be walking by, who wants to come join a workshop or, you know, pick some fresh plants. This is our objective. Now, our mission, we are creating a permaculture garden in the Saint Laurent urban community that serves as a living laboratory benefiting education, well-being, biodiversity, environmental awareness, and food security. So for those who don't know what permaculture means, I'll explain later on. Saint Laurent is where we are in Montreal. It's a semi-urban community, and living laboratory, this is an idea that we are very much in the process of starting little experiments in our gardens and recording the results and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't, And a lot of these are student-led initiatives that we are kind of facilitating in our gardens. We're really looking to turn the gardens into more of a lab of the kind that you would see in your physics, your chemistry, or biology classes, along those lines. Now, here's our map of campus. And for those who haven't been to Vanier before, it's another old and religious complex. Like our main building here has a library in what was originally a church. We have a church next door and a cemetery here and a cemetery here that doesn't belong to us. And there is this building here is not ours either. But we have the complex, the main building, and then this little building at the back here, as well as a football field just up. Now that's a lot of green space, as you can see. We're very fortunate here at Vanier to have access to all of this. And the majority of our gardens are in this triangle here. Originally in 2011, the gardens were in front of what's known as the A building right here. The main street is here, so it was in a very prominent position. However, they wanted to do some work on the buildings, and they kind of told us, well, when we do this, your gardens are probably going to get squished and turned under and rolled under all kinds of construction machinery. So we use that as an opportunity to say, okay, if this is what you're going to do, then move us to a bigger spot and give us more resources, which luckily they did. So we moved over here to this big triangle, which I'll zoom into in a short while. We have one little planter here, and then we have two triangular planters outside the sports complex, which I'll also get to show you later on. Now, our garden map here, so this is the triangle, this triangle right here that I just zoomed in on. This is what's going on if you look at it from Google Earth. Just scroll around the Vanier campus, and here's what's going on. So we have a bird habitat up here, which is essentially just a wild space that we've let grow. It was started by a technician of an environmental wildlife management class, and there she's planted a whole bunch of different indigenous species of bushes and trees to provide habitat for the birds. And it's getting there. It's getting there. She kind of started it by herself, and we yet really to incorporate it into our gardens. So we won't be seeing any more of that, but it's not too exciting, but it's there nonetheless, and it's certainly a part of our kind of green space management, should we say. The vegetable boxes here, for those who know a bit about permaculture, you have 5 zones. Zone 1 is your most heavily cultivated. Zone 2 is so in zone 1, sorry, you would have things like your culinary herbs and your vegetables. So moving up to zone 2, it's a little less intensive. Something like crops that you would sow and you go to once a week or so. And then moving up to 3, 4, 5. 5 is completely wild. 4 is somewhat wild, somewhat managed. And 3 is kind of the middle space of it all. So if I was to give you zones here, zone 1 would be our vegetable box. Zone 2 would be our pergola. We don't do too much there in terms of gardening. Zone 3 is our food forest. Right now we're really getting it started, but once it's started, I don't intend to be doing too much work there. And then these areas around here, the compost sometimes looks completely wild, so that might be a zone 5, but we do go there quite a lot, so it's more like a zone 3. So this is how we zone it. Like I was saying, the vegetable boxes are where we have kind of the most activity going, though starting our food forest has been a lot of work as well. Now, I am lucky enough to have Vanier Television come in 2 weeks ago and film a whole bunch of different clips here that we are going to now spend the time to look at, so you can get to visit our gardens virtually. This is the first day that I've done a virtual garden tour of Vanier, and it's quite fun, and I hope that you'll find that it's immersive, like you can almost feel like you're there and taste the greens and smell the flowers, as it were. And wherever this little sun symbol is where the videos were taken from. So I'm going to go over here now and show you what this little clip looks like. So food forest in the background, we have our pergola here, and then we have our main boxes right here and our shed in the background. This chain link fence here separates us from this building behind us, which is the nunnery complex right there. And we also have a raised planter right here, which is for disabled access in order to allow movement impaired folks to be able to garden too. And in terms of water, as I know this is something you've studied this year, we have one water access point here with various different hoses coming off, and I'll kind of explain a bit more in detail about what's going on with those. So now we're going to move from here to the vegetable boxes. So we have, I think it's 8 boxes in total, and these 4 are our biggest boxes, and we are practicing a crop rotation. This is by many organic farmers and even non-organic, I would say as well. It's knowledge that goes back for hundreds of years. It's the idea that growing one crop in the same place year after year after year not only depletes the soil, but it also increases bug pressure as those insects learn where those foods are going to be each year. They lay their eggs right there, and then as soon as they hatch, they have the food ready and waiting for them. And what else happens if we keep on doing a rotation? Just a general decline in yield and a decline in plant and soil health. So this year, in this box, which we're going to zoom into very shortly, we have garlic. And then this box here is going to be a rotation of squash plants and other cuc families. So this includes squash, pumpkins, and cucumbers. They're going to live in that box. And then this box over here, we are going to add our nightshades. So this is plants such as tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. They're all going to go in there. And then this box at the far back here is the one that I noticed last year was kind of looking pretty tired and a bit run down. So this is our fallow box. This is the idea that there's not actually going to be any vegetables grown in here, and this box is really getting the spar treatment this year. It's going to have special crops grown in it that help fertilize the soil, which I'll talk you through very shortly. You can also see an irrigation system here that we have running through it. I pause it right here. We can see that there's little tubing that comes into each of our boxes, which is connected to a system of valves that we are able to water. We normally have the hose on a timer. So you twist it around, it's a little mechanical timer, we leave it on for 30 minutes, and we gauge the pressure. At full blast, this thing shoots like 6 feet in the air. At a lower temperature, lower pressure, it's just a little trickle, which is what we want. And I am very happy with this irrigation system. It's in its 3rd year now, and so far, so good, no signs of leaking. I really dislike hose pipes because they fall apart, they get tangled, they get chewed up by lawnmowers, and it's just a whole bunch of plastic at the end of the day that's going in a landfill somewhere. So having some alternatives is great. I know that PVC piping or PEX piping here isn't the best, environmentally speaking, but it does seem to last a little bit longer, that's for sure. And we just let it drain at the end of the season, and we have no frost problems there. So now we're going to zoom in on our garlic. Garlic needs mulch. And for those who don't know what mulch is, it's kind of the magical word in gardening. It's the idea of using a whole series of different materials to provide color to the soil. If you take a walk in a forest, you'll never see what I call naked soil or bare earth, which is exposed soil. There's always like a layer of fallen branches or a layer of fallen leaves on top, providing a mulch covering to the ground. Now, in conventional agriculture, they would use sometimes black plastic, which is stretched across a bed, and then holes are poked into it and plants grow through that. And here at Vanier, we decided to use our leaves. So these are leaves from campus here, which help keep the humidity in, will break down and feed the worms. Especially, they love it. And I also allow a handful of other species to grow in here just to provide a little bit of diversity in our boxes. And over here now, we are at the last box here. This is the rest and relaxation box. So here, this is a cover crop that's growing. And cover crops, for those who don't know, are a mix of plants that are grown to help feed the soil. It's otherwise known as a living mulch or a green mulch. And in here we have such things as buckwheat, that's the red stem. And then the grass looking thing, it is a grass in fact, it's either wheat or oats that's in here. And then we do have some peas in here hiding around, but I can't see them. They're quite visible today, but not in this video, which was taken a short while ago. And we also have some spring bulbs that have popped up that do that every year, the spring ephemerals. So this is our box here that I'll let grow to about knee height, and then it'll be cut down, it'll be dug into the soil, and then another cover crop will be laid on top of that. Probably I'll be able to do this 2-3 times this year, ideally 3. And then this box is going to be like super full of organic matter and therefore super full of life for the next crop that's going to go in here the following season. It's really getting a rest, this box right here. Now moving on, we have, if I can show you, I'll mention this right here. We have one sink, which is again connected to our hose pipe. I used a PEX pipe here. I replaced the always leaking hose pipe last year with a PEX pipe, which seems to last. And one thing about our gardens that is lacking is our sinks right here just drain straight into the, there's a little asphalt path that runs along the chain link fence here. It just drains straight onto that and creates a nice humid environment for moss and things growing under there, but otherwise it's a bit of a waste. So maybe a future project of mine is to take this water and channel it over here through a pipe, and then maybe create like a little wetland area. You can really you could plant Phragmites or cattails in a small pool of like 1 meter by 1 meter. And I don't know whether anyone's ever heard of compost toilets being used with Phragmites, which is the reed you can see growing in the side of the highway here. I saw one at a YMCA camp in northern Quebec, and they have 3 tiers of Phragmites, the reed. And basically the poopy water goes in the top, and then clean, safe water comes out the bottom. And the 3 beds of the reeds in kind of a terrace system are able to filter and drain and purify the water. Not that you would want to drink it necessarily at the bottom, but there's no more bacteria or contaminants left in that water that comes out, so it would be perfect water to water your vegetables with, or water your lettuce with, without fear of contaminants. And over here, I will show you now our herb spiral. So this is a design from permaculture. The idea is that you grow in a brick or stone structure that has difference in height. So in the middle here, it's the highest, and at the beginning of the spiral, it's the lowest. And this creates, in this high area, which is where you water it from, this is the driest part, and eventually the water runs round the spiral and it comes to the lowest part, which is the wettest part. And so here we can basically grow a large variety of herbs in different little microclimates. And something like rosemary or thyme, one of the Mediterranean herbs, will go on the top, and then things down the bottom, maybe like something like tiger grass or one of the carrot family that like it wet and swampy can grow down here in the bottom. And it's just a nice way to kind of maximize your biodiversity and your microclimates in a short, small space. It's not 100% finished yet. We still need to fill in some places here and there, but the students did this by themselves one year and they did a pretty darn good job. Now, moving on, we are going to step out of our vegetable boxes and have a look at our pergola over here. So the pergola, this is just a repeat. Okay, so the pergola was constructed as part of a grant that we had to make the gardens more socially inclusive. We do have a little gazebo over here, which was there a long time before us. It's not really part of the gardens yet. I'm working on it. And this pergola here, it was built in a day, believe it or not. And it really has become like a nice hangout space for students. It's not an outdoor classroom. It's not big enough for that, nor was it designed to be that. But we do use it for our workshops, and I am working on making it a little bit more better for teaching outdoors. And in the current light of things, like outdoor teaching spaces are kind of at a premium right now. So we can have a look what's going on here. My eventual aim, we actually have, as of last week, 2 solar panels put on here. And my eventual aim is to add a rainwater catchment system, ideally on top of the entire roof, that has a water butt that runs down the side here. And then we're going to use our solar panels to power a pump that sits inside our rainwater barrel, which then we can use to water our garden. And it's fingers crossed that's something we can work on with maybe a physics class or some other sustainability class at a point in the future. And something I'm also intending to do is to grow all sorts of vining plants on top of this pergola at the same time, because it's in full sun and in the middle of summer, it's really, really hot. Like there's not enough shade in our pergola at the moment to make it a usable space in the middle of the day in the summertime. So we really need those plants to move in here and to create shade cover for us humans in order to survive underneath it. And one plant that I'm kind of relying on to do part of this job is the hop plant, which you probably mostly know from beer, but it is spring shoots are edible and the flowers are medicinal, not only for making beers, but for teas and tinctures, and it's a very good sleepy herb. So you take a tea of beer, or beer with your lunch, and you feel drowsy afterwards. That's the hops doing its thing. And the aim is for them to vine up this trellis here, reach these poles, and then maybe by this year, I think they'll do it, to reach the rooftop right up here. I also have some grape plants sitting on my balcony ready to go in around this pergola too. And I think that's it for the pergola to say. Anything else? No. So now we're going to just move along the back fence, and then we're going to go into the food forest. So let's have a look at the tool shed. So over here at the tool shed, we have one rainwater collection system already. It's a very simple shed here, which we store the majority of our tools in. And we have a a guttering that leads down a drain pipe into this water butt here. But unfortunately, it's not something that we use that often because it lacks the pressure. It doesn't have really enough pressure to run a hose pipe. It would dribble out if anything. And so we can only really fill watering cans from here. And at the moment, we've got a lot of garden to do with watering cans. So this is used, especially when the water's not on and it's too cold because of risk of freezing. We can use this, though in general, this water just kind of sits around. But I will be using this for our mushroom logs this year, I think, a lot. And eventually, like I was explaining earlier, this is why I want to put an electric pump into one of these so we can actually use our rainwater with pressure, which will be a really great addition. Now, moving on to our compost here, we have a few different kinds of compost. Actually, I want to talk about the shed bed first. Yes, so just to the left of the shed, we have one bed right here, and this is our fancy insect hotel that's being built as part of a sustainability project about, 2-3 years ago now. And we use a variety of different materials: pine cones, bark, bits of wood with holes drilled in them, and bamboo. And out of them all, it seems like you can even see here, this little circle here is kind of white or yellow in color. That's a mason bee that's moved in there and made its home. And this is the solitary bee that lives in Quebec. It's the indigenous bee here. They don't make hives, they don't make honey. Our honeybees are actually introduced species from Northern Africa. And as everybody knows, our bees are disappearing at quite an alarming rate. So creating habitat for them, and in the way of insect hotels, is one way that we can encourage pollinators to come to our gardens. Now, my final aim for this garden here, I don't know whether you can see it growing at the bottom here, but this is a very good friend of mine. This is stinging nettle. Now, stinging nettle, as the name might suggest, has quite a sting to it. And if anyone has ever touched it, you'll know what stinging nettle is. And if you haven't touched it, I recommend you learn, because I've met quite a few people in my days as a kind of wild forager and tour guide that didn't know what stinging nettle was, and when these people went to take a call of nature and bent down in the forest, they then were introduced to stinging nettle in a most intimate way, and not the not the most safe nor enjoyable way to do it. Now, the reason that I planted this here is my eventual aim is to create an educational poisonous garden. And I don't know whether any of you have ever been to the botanical gardens in Montreal, but they also have a poison garden there, and they have some really deadly species. They've got the poison hemlock, for example, which grows there. And I've been to Dorset, and they also have a little poison garden where they have wild carrot, the yellow parsnip, and the poison ivy growing there. And the idea being that with the right barriers, fences, and signage, we can safely learn what these plants look like in a known environment, so that when we're in an unknown environment, we know how to identify them, and we don't accidentally introduce ourselves to stinging nettle in a much more unpleasant way, or any of those other plants. Now, one little experiment I was doing here, just at the beginning of the season, beginning of April, I planted peas. A nice winter hardy crop. These are snow peas in particular. And we can see one pea growing here. I planted like 3 or 4 seeds per little section here. And what's going on here is what's known as a cloche. It's a borrowed word from French, meaning bell. And it's basically a little mini greenhouse. We can see the humidity that's being kept in there by having this cloche on top, as well as the heat and the protection from the elements. It actually snowed about a week after this, and the peas that were not under the cloche were damaged by the snow, whereas these that were protected had no such sign of damage. And we can also see the difference in germination here. There's a handful more there, and the difference in the size. Like these ones are growing a lot bigger here, and this was just a nice little experiment. We're going to be watching this over time to see how they fare with the ones that have gotten like a nice little head start. So now, compost. There we go. So moving on, the shed beds right to the left here. if that makes sense to you. To the right, sorry. And we have one compost here, which is kind of our seedy compost. Any debris from the gardens that are filled with seeds go in this compost pile here. The idea being that we want to really separate the seedy compost, because I don't want to use this on my gardens until I've treated it for the seeds, because otherwise I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of introduced weedy species. When I just wanted plain compost, I'm now going to end up with about a dozen different species growing underneath my tomatoes. So this is the weedy one here, which I'll probably treat by rolling it, putting it in a black trash can and letting the heat from the sun warm up the soil and germinate the seeds with it inside it. And you kind of roll it around to really stimulate those seeds. And in a trash can, it lasts like 6 weeks or so until everything kind of germinates and then dies from the lack of light. And then I can use that as a garden compost. Moving on here, we have some logs that were cut down, which we're using for our mushroom projects as well as footpaths. We have a non-seedy compost here. This is a lot of food scraps that go in here, in the black one. This wooden one here is our old compost, which is now empty. That's where the compost kind of matures and does its thing. And then we have a whole pile of leaves and branches here that are doing their thing, which we will, I don't know whether you've ever used leaves as a mulch in a garden, but they're one of the best soil builders around. So I managed to collect a whole bunch of leaves from our garden, and then this right here is the whole pile of grass that we dug up from the main garden food forest. And I'll just show you, nice, I hope you're holding on to your lunch here. This is our compost pile, which we add alternate layers of kitchen scraps and leaves to balance out that compost and keep it nice and healthy and not smelling too bad. So this is our compost here. The shed bed is right in between that. Now I'm going to move over to the mushroom logs. So these were started as a project last semester, and we have 4 different kinds of mushrooms: reishi, lion's mane, blue oyster, and shiitake. And we have 3 different kinds of tree that all come from around our gardens. We have a maple, we have a birch, and we have a linden or a basswood. And they live right here in kind of a shady spot. They don't have a permanent location just yet. And I will now show you, this is where they are. And This shady spot here, my eventual aim for our gardens, the cedar is right here in the corner. I'll eventually pick that up and move it, and I want to put a bench in here. And then these conifers, these are junipers right here, are the start of what I hope becomes a conifer corner, which is basically a little privacy space where it's a little screen that blocks off the campus in front. And then we're probably going to add some natural weaving to this chain link fence to create a screen behind it. And the idea is that it can be a little quiet spot for reflection, meditation, or just to sit and breathe in an otherwise very busy and populated campus, in normal days, that is. Now we can have a look at our mushrooms here. So for those who don't know about mushroom cultivation, the way that it works, at least with logs, is you drill a little hole, you take a furniture dowel, which is like a wooden peg that's been inoculated with the mycelium. It's basically full of this white fuzzy stuff which grows mushrooms. Drill a hole in the log, tap it in, and then seal it with a wax, ideally beeswax. And then what happens is from those plugs, we can see here how there's this white stuff growing around it. That is the mycelium that is starting to spread through the wood. And this one here, the linden, is really a good example here. We can see this nice patch of mycelium growing on the side there. And some did better than others. The maple, we discovered, loved to be eaten by the rodents that we have living over winter. So here we can see how it's all being gnawed. And we did have a lot of discarded maple twigs and bark all around, but for some reason they really like these logs. So these, hopefully they'll last. They're going to need a bit more attention when the summer comes. We have to soak these in water regular basis, and this one with the missing bark is going to need a bit more attention in order to stay humid. And the birch, I have no idea how the birch is doing. It's really hard to see, but they're in there. Nothing's eaten it so far, so we'll see what it looks like. And here the maple's doing okay. And the idea is that like the smaller logs at the end here are going to be ready in a year or two, whereas the bigger ones like the very first linden are going to take a good 3-4 years, but they'll make a lot more mushrooms. And so that's how we're kind of recycling our wood on campus there. Now we're going to move on to the food forest. And for those who don't know what a food forest is, it's essentially a very traditional way of growing food that can be found all the way around the world and has a lifespan of 80 to 120 years. If you're interested in learning more about this, there's such techniques known as milpas, which happen in Central America still today. And the idea is that and we used to do this as a culture in Europe, and certainly the First Nations did it here as well. They kind of take a section of the forest, they reset it by burning or flooding the area. And then I read a book once that suggested that at the same time, 200 species are seeded. And the idea is that you work with the succession of plants. So in the first 5 years, you get your fast growing annual crops, your tomatoes or your beans or your corn that grow very quickly. After 5 years, the bushes move in. So this is when you get things like red currants or raspberries or blackberries that start moving in and creating shade. And then after 10, 15 years, the fruit trees start to take over. And they start to take a lot of shade. The fruit trees, they last 20 to 30 years. And so after that, your nut trees take over. And your nut trees can last anywhere from 50 to 120 years. And essentially what we started at Vanier, let me skip right here, is we started off with our grass. This is our section of the forest, if you will, that had been reset. And we have started our own little food forest. Now, the idea of a food forest is that there are 8 or 9 different layers. And each layer has something medicinal or edible or performing an ecological niche that helps everything grow in turn. The idea is that there are plant guilds. And plant guilds, everyone's heard of the 3 sisters, where there's 3 plants, beans, corn, and squash, growing together. And each one has a little niche that helps the others perform better. And so we are looking to recreate a food forest at Vanier for the next 120 years. This will be growing food, ideally. And I won't go through all the layers here. They're right there. And we also did a workshop on backyard food forests, which you can find online. I'll show you how to get that later on. So here in 2019, this is when we planted them here. We planted 20 fruit and nut trees. We have pecans, hazelnuts, and walnuts, black walnuts. And the fruiting trees that we have, Saskatoon or Juneberry or Amelanchier. We also have plums, pears, and apples growing here. And they're directly in grass. And for those who don't know, grass is really not a good friend to trees. They have very thick, fibrous root system that take water and nutrients from the trees that stop the roots of the trees from actually accessing it. So our first objective is to remove the grass. Now it's a hell of a lot of grass to remove here, right? So we're starting slowly just in these diamonds to help the lawnmower go through it when the grass that we're not able to cut down. And working in these diamonds, here you can see volunteers and our gardeners working to remove the sod by hand. And those that we removed, some of them we seeded. And this is another cover crop in here of oats and buckwheat that's going in there. Here we can see the squirrels. There's at least 3, 4 squirrels, maybe 5 down here in this picture. I think there were maybe a dozen that I saw in this little section here eating away when I seeded it again. And here we can see what's happening. The cover crops are growing nice and high. I planted some plants within the cover crop. That's totally something you can do. The nice thing about cover crops is they grow fast and quick, so they stop the weeds from growing. And then when you're ready to plant into it, you just cut down a little section and you can put your tomatoes right into that section that you just cut, and you can leave the rest of the cover crop around it. So it's really, you work slow and steady, which is one of the principles of permaculture there. And here we can see the similar picture from the other angle. And these are the oats here starting to flower. We've got a little bit of catnip and basil and a few other plants poking around in there. This is one cover crop of buckwheat, which really, zooming in here, we can see the pollinators loved it. There was so much life going on here. It was really beautiful to see. Butterflies and ladybugs and all sorts really enjoying this. And then I came in one day and cut it all down, much to the distress, I should think. But as you can see, we had another one in the background, so they didn't go completely hungry. And the idea is we cut it down, and then on this page, this picture on the right here, another crop was seeded into it to help again feed the soil and continue the rotation. And here's a nice little monarch butterfly hanging out in our garden too. And another form of mulch that we tried was what's known as sheet mulching with cardboard, where you lay down cardboard, you put soil on top, and then you put wood chips. And whenever you want to plant into it, you just like poke a hole through the cardboard and put your plant straight in the ground, and all of the soil underneath it is kind of choked and can no longer grow, which is a pretty handy way. Now, this is my plan for the food forest in its kind of final stage, and we recently got a grant from Tree Canada to plant close to $3,000 of new edible species in our forest. And we can see here the tool shed, the pergola, and then a whole series of footpaths running around inside the food forest with a little meeting space in the middle. And these are keyhole gardens, which are a way of growing a lot of food without using a lot of footpath. And then the front here, this semicircle, this is one half of the semicircle. These are going to be permanent meadows. So rather than just growing a cover crop and then cutting it down and then filling it with wood chips and putting other species on top of it, this space and the space to the right here, we're dedicating to growing a kind of Quebec meadow. And here we can see students in a biology class last week sowing the cover crop right here and for the meadow. And I gave them a list of all of the seeds that I'd ordered over the winter, and then they had to come up with a recipe. So there's 4 sections in this one bit here that the classes each did on their own. And some of them have like soybeans in, some of them have radish in, others have like a whole bunch of mustard, and the majority, all of them, I made sure had buckwheat and oats in there as well, just to keep it somewhat uniform. But we're going to find out later on in the year, kind of A, what's growing well, B, what mixes worked in terms of density, and then C, kind of the next step is to start doing soil tests and really see out of these 4 different mixes which one is encouraging the most activity in the roots and in the soil of the plants. So that's what we've been up to here. And now we can take a look at what the food forest looks like on the ground. So this is the meadow on the left and the to-be meadow on the right. Our daffodil path right here. This is one of our apple trees right here. We have another apple. No, this is pear growing here. There's the footpath and the pergola in the background. And let's see, what else have we got going on? Not a lot growing because it's, you know, it's still the beginning of the season here. These are pear about to flower. These are red currants, which are very easy to propagate. I just took a handful of stems, cut them and stuck them in the ground here, and they literally have about a 50% success rate to just grow by themselves. Very easy to propagate. This is the broad view of the food forest here. Here you can see the 5 different diamonds that we have. And I think there's one video which I didn't show before, which I can really show the different mulching systems here. So I'm just gonna have a quick look, and here's me walking up and down the footpath here, showing you how it's done. Now let me see if I can find the right one. Diamonds, here it is. So these are looking over the different diamonds here. So this was the one where, to give you a little example, we take the grass, we turn it upside down, and then we cover it with wood chips. And then the grass rots, it kills the grass underneath it, and we can then plant into that. This is one, this is this year. I haven't seeded anything in this diamond this year, and yet we can see there's a whole bunch of perennials starting to pop up, as well as a lot of, I like to leave the garden debris at least until the kind of the end of spring, because a lot of insects lay their larvae in here, a lot of beneficial insects. And if we cut this all down and rake it off and, you know, clean our gardens in the traditional way, then we remove all of those beneficial insects that are potentially living in here. So in the next 2-3 weeks, this will all be cut down and cleaned. And for now, I'm just seeing like there's a lot of dandelion popping up, which is great news. We've got a little garlic here, and there's a whole bunch of goldenrod in here, which is really starting to come through as well. And this is kind of, it does look messy, but that's okay. Like this can all be cleaned up at a later stage. And for me, what I'm really looking for is the level of life going on here. Now, this is the diamond that we did the cardboard mulching on. And here you can see that there's, if I remove this layer, this right here is the layer of cardboard, which is still there. You can pick up a little bit of it, and you see all those roots under there trying to get up and through that cardboard. The fact that the cardboard's there and then the wood chips are on top are stopping the weeds from growing through. And so this saved us a lot of time, like putting the cardboard on top and not having to remove the grass proved to be a much faster way to do this. However, you know, is it going to be as beneficial as to if I was able to put a cover crop on here? I don't know. We'll find out with some tests later on, hopefully. So now we are moving on. How are we doing for time? 10 more minutes. Oh, okay, got to get a move on. So sports complex right here. Nice and simple. I'll show you our video for the sports complex. Let's see. Did I mess up my order? Yes, I did. Okay. Here we go. Shed, compost, mushrooms, forest, diamond. Nope. Okay. I gotta find it again. So we are K planter. Here we go. So, oh no, not the K planter. Sorry. It is sports. And I want the insect. Here we go. So this is our vegetable planter here. We've just got a little bit of garlic growing in here this year. And there was originally, you see this little bit of black plastic. This was all in black plastic when I started growing here, when I started working here and growing here. And I've left a little bit in there to kind of show the students what it looks like. And this photo here is what our triangle looked like last year. So this was our 3 sisters here. It is Rosemary doing her stuff in the background. And we have our corn, our beans, our squash, as well as a whole other polyculture of tomatoes and kale and broccoli growing in here. And it was super abundant. Like, is this the most productive way? No. Is it the most biodiverse way? Yes. And that's really what we're looking for here. Here's another little side shot. Here's Isabel harvesting some herbs. And future projects. So what we're going to be doing in the future for our gardens. This is some signposts that we have designed to be cut into wood using our computer department's laser engraver, teaching people how to recognize botanical families. These are going to be put in our gardens so that people can walk around and teach themselves. We also have the solar panels, which have gone on the roof. We have, this is our my seed bank and tea bar project. The idea is that we harvest the seed from our gardens and we're going to offer it to the public, as well as dried tea. And I can show you what it looks like right here, our seed bank. This is it, work in progress right here. We're going to have a little notice board and then a shelf and then the tea and the seeds in here open to the public. And the last thing, we have approval for creating a First Nations garden. This is the Botanical Gardens First Nation garden here. And we are working with 2 previous students from Ganasatagi and Ganawagi to help us create a Mohawk-style First Nations garden. Lastly, you can volunteer with us, or you can sign up to our newsletter to at least know what's going on and find our online workshops. I know that it's a long distance from where we are to where you are, but if you ever come to Montreal for a day or so, you can come join us. And the Vanier College Television is where you can find the previous workshops on the backyard food forest, as well as winter ID and wild plant identification. Just look for the sustainability playlist. And that is me. So I think I am done here. Let me stop sharing my screen. Whew, just in time.
So I wanted to say a really big thank you to Mark and also open the floor to questions. I know Cassidy wrote in the chat, I have a small poison garden as well, but the plants are hard to maintain. I find it took some getting used to and lots of protection. Mark, do you have any comments on, caring for traditional domesticated plants like tomatoes and carrots as opposed to wild plants?
In what sense? Like,
I guess I'm wondering about Cassidy's comment that she was saying that a poison garden with these wild plants like nettle, or you talked about poison ivy, or some of the others, why they might be harder to maintain.
Right. A lot of it is to do with the biomes that they grow in. Like poison ivy is found ideally in like disturbed woodland forest. So like we don't have a woodland forest floor to grow poison ivy. So trying to recreate that, what I found, and also for control purposes, is to really grow it in pots. Like this is because you don't want the poison ivy accidentally starting to spread or seed or get into your compost. So keeping it controlled and trying to mimic the original circumstances that you find these plants in the wild is probably the best piece of advice I can give. So if you're looking to kind of grow poison ivy, for example, you want to put a lot of leaf litter and wood chips on top of the soil to recreate that forest floor. And ideally you would do that like a year or 2 before you plant the poison ivy, because there's a whole like exchange between basically vegetables grow in disturbed soil, which is very bacterially rich, whereas a lot of woodland plants, the soil isn't disturbed and there's a lot of fungal life. And so we need to let the soil rest and to encourage that fungal life to kind of flourish before we can expect that woodland species would start growing well in that soil. So it's takes a while. Like patience, I guess, is the best piece of advice for that.
Thank you. And any other questions, comments for Mark?
Oh yeah, I have one.
Go right ahead.
So, do you ever worry about the soil becoming too saturated with water if there's no grass?
Good question. Like especially in the rainy seasons of Quebec, they're like the first diamond that we worked on. I did notice, and especially when we dug out the soil, it was a little bit lower and it did get flooded. But luckily, it didn't get. It's not there anymore. And a little piece of advice I learned from a recent class on planting trees is to dig a hole at least 4 to 5 feet deep in your garden. And if you have water that remains above 4 feet, then it's too wet for a lot of fruit trees. And this, I'm talking about like in like around this time of year. If you still have that water there, then you know that in order to plant your fruit trees, you're actually going to have to mound the soil. So you're going to have to build the soil above the actual ground level in order to allow the roots of the trees to stay dry. For us, like removing the grass, the idea is like wood chips are like a giant sponge. They soak up all that water eventually, and they hold it for a lot longer. So although we removed grass, I didn't see a big increase in the amount of surface water because those wood chips were really put in place. And here's a good little tip as well. Like, we haven't paid a single cent for our wood chips. We got on the yellow pages online, and we just started calling arborist companies, and within 20 minutes we found a local guy that started bringing wood chips to our gardens for free, because they actually have to pay to burn them here in Montreal. So they get a little something and we get a lot of wood chips, and it's a great way to kind of build connections with your gardens at the same time. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions for Mark? And just, well, if you're thinking about it, you want to put in a question in the chat, then please do. I also wanted to pick up on a couple of points that came up during the discussion today that to me stood out because it ties in really nicely with what we've been looking at in the course. You know, Mark talked a lot about mulch today, whether it be mulch on the garden or sorry, mulch in the garlic bed or mulch in other parts of the garden as a way of building healthy soil, which absolutely is really helpful for our crops. But you also might remember when we were talking about climate change earlier this semester, and you learned about soils sequestering carbon, and the more we have healthy soils, because we're doing things like mulching, the more we can sequester carbon in our soils and help with climate change. The other thing from a climate change perspective that Mark talked about was the cover crops, talking about planting the peas and the buckwheat and the oats, and that's a way of fertilizing the soil naturally as opposed to using chemical fertilizers, right? And we learned earlier this semester about how chemical fertilizers, the production of them releases nitrous oxide, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. It's kind of like the down vest version of the greenhouse gas as opposed to just the flannel shirt. So I think it's really neat to see how these techniques that they're applying in the gardens at Vanier are very much addressing some of the concerns we talked about with climate change. So just wanted to thank you for that, because it's really inspiring to see what are steps that we can do, not just as individuals in our lives, like trying to say, okay, well, I'm going to drive less, or I'm going to try and, you know, reduce the waste that I'm producing, but also what we can do within our institutions to try and mitigate climate change, but also create a really like inspiring environment while we're at it. To see some of those wildflowers and all the insects is really, really exciting. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.